From the moment my mother is missing, my father says, she disappeared, she took a little vacation, whatever. It was go time. And I was in action doing everything that I could to find out what happened to her and to do everything I could to get justice for her.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Helping with Dr. Richard Schuster. Food for the brain, knowledge from the experts, tools to win at life. I'm your host, Dr. Richard. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, and whatever you do, this is the show that is going to help you become the best version of yourself. Each episode, you will hear from some of the most amazing, talented, and successful people on the planet who followed their passions and strive to help others. Join our movement to get 1 million people each day to commit acts of kindness for others. Together, we're going to make the world a better place. Are you ready? Because it's time for your Daily Helping. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Daily Helping Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Richard, and today we are going to continue my interview with Collier Landry. If you didn't listen to part 1, you have to stop this right now and go back an episode, because this is one of the most powerful stories I think anybody has ever shared with me on the Daily Helping. He mentioned that he's pretty sure that his father had killed his mother, and part 2 is going to pick up where we left off, where he had told his friend who was a police officer that he was pretty sure his father was going to kill him the next day. So we're going to continue on with that. And there's a lot of questions that I had after Collier continues his story. So we are jumping right back in.
So I didn't hear from Dave for a couple of days. And on the morning of January 24th, 1990, I woke up to 2 children's services officers or people from children's services saying, you have 20 minutes to pack a bag for you and your sister. We're getting you out of here. And I can hear all this commotion downstairs, my grandmother yelling and things like that. I'm packing a bag and I say to them, I'm packing it for my sister. And I say, I have my dog right there. And I said, can I take my dog? And they said, no, we'll come back for your dog. I never saw my dog again. And as we're coming down the stairs, it's like everything's playing in slow motion, like in the movies. There are men and women in white lab coats. There are police cars outside, the lights going. Dave Messmore is there serving a search warrant. And they are all going through the house. And I'm just walking through all of this. And I just remember thinking, well, I already knew my life was changed on New Year's Eve. Now I knew it had escalated to another level. And, okay, this is really happening. And there's sort of this like definitive cognitive dissonance here that you've got to go through. And I go through that a lot with this situation, but where it's like you can't help but almost feel guilty. Because, of course, I internalize all on me as an empath, like, well, if I hadn't been talking to the police, that our life wouldn't have been disrupted or what have you, you know what I mean? Save for the fact that my father committed a crime. But, there's these things that go through your head, and I don't go to school that day. And that night, I end up, because I stay at my principal of my school's house, and I end up having like the worst asthma attack of my life. I thought I was going to die because I didn't grab all my stuff when I left. And the next day, they take me to the hospital, and a friend of ours who was a cardiologist was there to meet us. And I remember in the lobby, it was really packed in the hospital. And I remember walking towards like the blue honor boxes where they put the newspapers in. For those of you that remember newspapers and things like that, they put them in honor boxes. And I remember being moved away from that and walked to a different side of the hospital lobby. And cardiologist gave me a steroid injection to calm the inflaming in my lungs, and then gave me a breathing treatment, and everything was fine. And then that's when they told me. They said, Collier, Lieutenant Messmore found your mother. And it was like this eternal pause. You're just kind of like, okay. Because you don't know what's coming next. And then they said she was dead. And she was dead. Now, you've worked with a lot of foster kids and people with trauma. But you still know that it's like, again, that sort of cognitive dissonance. Because on one hand, this sort of relief kind of washes over you, where you're like, okay, I'm not crazy. I wasn't making this all up. Because when you're living through something like this, you think you're making it up. You're like, no, I must be perceiving this wrong. Like nothing has happened to her. He's just like she's going to be okay, or I didn't hear what I heard. This can't really be happening. He can't be this person. You think that, right? You are literally trying to almost gaslight yourself. I don't think this is true. This is just a nightmare. But you have that relief that just washes over you, that just says, no, you were right. That what you believed was true was actually true. On the flip side, with that relief comes this unspeakable, unimaginable sorrow that just cascades down over it like a waterfall, where you realize that what you knew was true, that you'll never see your mother again. The one person who meant the most to you in this world, that you'll never get those moments, and they just play back the hugs, the kisses, the time spent, being in her presence, all of that's gone. Yeah, it's really hard to put into words, but I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And I remember thinking like, okay, well, lots changed now, okay, now we're we've got another step here in this ever-changing, ever-evolving life of mine. Then you start to think about like what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to my sister, that's all I can start to think about, and how am I going to like tell my friends and all of this stuff. And every year my mother would she was on the school board, and she would head up a Chinese New Year celebration. So it was like that day at our school, ironically. And I remember coming into the gymnasium when I went back to school, and I just saw obviously there were little kids in the school, so they were oblivious to what happened, but the teachers, the parents that were there, everybody's just you can just see they're just devastated. They're just shocked. Because my mother just had such a light and a presence, and everybody just loved her. And I think also just the horrificness of a murder's been committed in this small town. Okay. And, I see my friends, and I remember thinking, my friends were on the other side of the gymnasium, my classmates. And all I can think about is when my grandmother, my mother's mother, passed. We were having the service in the church, and she told me beforehand, she said, you need to be strong for Pop-Pop, who was my mother's father, my grandfather. She didn't want me to cry in front of him. She wanted me to be strong for him because it was really hard for him losing a spouse of 50 plus years. I just remember, you got to be strong for everyone. And I don't know if I ever outgrew that, by the way. So that night, Dave Messmore came to visit me, and he wanted to talk to me, understandably so. And I remember asking him, what did her body look like? Because what he tells me is he goes, remember that house you found the photograph of? That's where I found her, which is really wild. She had been buried underneath the basement floor, which was then painted and covered over with green astroturf, and bookshelves were built over top of it, and they had to dig her up. And I remember him asking me about a blue tarp. And I was like, yeah, I went to, my father bought that with me at Kmart. And that's what he had wrapped her body in. So again, in one of those moments, you're just like, I don't know what's going to happen. And I ended up testifying at the grand jury to secure my father's indictment. We had a memorial service for my mother, but I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral because I was going to be a witness against my father in the trial. And obviously my father was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, which is premeditated murder, because they had substantial evidence that all this was planned for even months ahead of time. And I remember thinking, okay, where am I going to go? And I talked to my mother's mother and my uncle, and she was my godmother. And trauma is a difficult subject because some people handle it very differently, right? My father had caused a great amount of pain towards my mother's side of the family, and this was just yet another injury, and adding insult to injury, and probably the most injurious of those things was taking the life of her sister, or being accused of it at that time, I suppose. But my aunt had said to me, we can't take you in because you look like your father. And that was hard. And, I was scared because I was like, oh, okay, well, where am I going to go? And then my father's side of the family, my father's brother, who was really close with my mother, they were best friends. They used to talk on the phone every night. I mean, it was wild. My Uncle Charles, who was my godfather. And he said, we're not going to have anything to do with you to take you in because you put your father in jail. And if you don't rescind what you said and got him arrested, you're not part of our family. So I was remanded to the foster care system, which for anyone listening to this, look, I had it. Foster care sucks. It's awful. But I had it probably better than a lot of people do, but it still was horrible. It was not a great situation at all. And so I was kind of isolated and alone because I was here as the main witness against my father, but also I had no family. And, I wasn't allowed to watch television because it's all over the news. It's huge news and every day in the paper and all this stuff. And so, I can only imagine if this had happened in the age of social media, what it would have been like and the spectacle it would have been, because it was a spectacle back then. And I remember the prosecutor, one of the things with Dave that he had told me later is that the prosecutor didn't want to prosecute the case. Like, he almost lost his job over this because they were like, you're listening to an 11-year-old child, an 11-year-old kid who's convinced you of this. And the guy's a doctor. He's going to sue us. There's no way. And when Dave found that body and when that all happened, it was like, it was right. And there was no way, even with the prosecutor saying, well, you don't have to testify. I was like, over my dead body. And I tell this a lot to young people, especially that go through like pivotal moments in your life, right? Are you going to have the courage to stand up and do what's right and be able to look yourself in the mirror and go, no matter what happens, I did my best. I did what I knew in my heart to be the truth and all of this. Or do you back down to pressure, or do you just not deal with it? Stick your head in the sand, because you can't stick your head in the sand is the point. You have to either deal with it or you can't. And I guess for me, there was never a choice, but a lot of people are very quick and right to point out that they're like, Collier, you could have not said anything and just lived the rest of your life with your father's lie and just lived a nice life. That's an option for people. Like, you could have just been like, okay, I'll just accept this because I don't want to interfere with my life and I just want to lead a life, which was obviously never an option for me. But I remember thinking to myself, like, I said, over my dead body, I'm not going to testify, because I knew that if I didn't stand up in court, face down that monster. I was on the witness stand for 2 days facing my father in open court. And the whole thing was televised, by the way. The trial was on TV. And I testified. I knew that if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror at my age I'm at now, or any age, and know that I did what I knew was right, and I did what was true to me, and I did my best. And that's something that you've got to recognize, those moments, because they will haunt you if you don't. Because if I hadn't testified and my father had gotten off, or let's say my father did get off and I still testified, the risk is that I would go back to his care and his custody, and he would never let me forget about the time that I tried to put him in prison for killing my mother. He still was great at doing that, even though he went to prison. And, I can't imagine how I would have suffered, because a lot of these stories that involve these types of situations don't end the way that mine did. You don't end with like a walking, functional human being that, look, I have my flaws, but you don't see that a lot. You see people's lives who just get derailed at a very young age from these types of traumas and these types of situations, and I'm not saying it was easy. It was the worst, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I knew in those moments, I was like, I have to do this. I have to stand up to it. This is a pivotal moment in my life. At 12 years old, I was 12 by the time I went to trial, that this was going to be a key pivotal moment in my life. And I had to act on it, or else I'd never be able to face myself again.
Collier, what you've shared is so powerful. And I have so much respect for the courage you showed as a kid. This has been 35 years or so. And as you said, you're a functional human being. There are many people who go through things like this, and they're not anywhere close to being functional, much less having the platform you have, which you share this story about in various mediums. What do you think it was that helped you heal? And then the second part of that is, what drove you to want to share that with the world?
I always think, and I talked about this, I did a TED Talk years ago. So one of the things that I think, when I think about trauma and resilience and things of this nature, I always feel like it's action that leads you through those traumatic experiences. I think making the decision that, okay, this is what I'm going to do from the moment my mother is missing. My father says, she disappeared, she took a little vacation, whatever. It was go time. And I was in action doing everything that I could to find out what happened to her and to do everything I could to get justice for her. And I think that was one of those things that really just my tenacity, grit, resilience, what have you, all of these things combined together, that veracity for the truth to be brought to light, right? And to get that justice. I think that's what ultimately was the first step in all of this. The second is that I wanted to, and this will segue into your other question, which is I wanted to share this story. Well, I didn't want to share this story in a way. I was adopted by a family, and I ended up a year after being in foster care, and which was tough and had its own challenges of coming to a family where they already have a son that's established and who's younger than you and all this, and it's a lot. But I remember I never wanted to be known for this. I wanted people to look at me because everywhere we would go, everyone knew me as though that's the Boyle kid. That's the kid whose dad murdered his mom, and then you hear all this growing up of like, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, or could he be a murderer like his dad, or you never know about him, or what's he going to do with his life, or he's going to fall apart. You have all these people. It's like, and I think nowadays probably even worse or more exacerbated, or at least more popularized on social media, the whole schadenfreude of the situation, right? So I knew that I needed to get out of that situation because I needed to know for myself. I needed to go to a place. I moved to California. I dropped out of music. So I went to music school for 2.5 years. I dropped out. I moved to California and wanted to work in the entertainment industry and do something with this story to share it with the world, but on my own terms, right? I just was thinking like, I want to go to a place where no one knows who I am. So if you like me, I know that you like me for Collier. I heard a lot growing up, well, you don't want people to feel sorry for you. You don't want to be a victim. And I think my adopted family was very concerned with that. They never wanted me to become this like victim, this helpless victim, or this poor woe is me. I mean, you see that a lot in society now. This woe is me victimization, constant perpetual victimization of people. And you're just like, oh my goodness, it's just, it's a lot. And I think that, that was something that was super key for me is that I didn't want to be known for this. I wanted to take the story on my own terms, right? So moved to California, never told a soul about this. I mean, girls I dated, sure, some friends. A lot of people knew me as like, oh, Collier, he comes from Ohio. His dad killed his mom and he was adopted. Like that was it. That's sort of the overarching thing that they knew. So, but I set into motion. I was like, I'm going to tell this story one way or another. I never knew what it was going to look like, whether it was going to be, I would become a rock star and I become famous. I'd tell the story, or I'd become a filmmaker and tell the story. And that's what I became. I became a filmmaker. I became a working cinematographer, and I learned all the craft of filmmaking. And I ended up meeting a really great friend of mine who's still friends to this day. In fact, I'm taking him out for Father's Day. His name is John Morrissey. He produced a film called American History X that changed my life. I saw that film and I said, whoever made that film understands the consequences of violence. And flash forward 10 years later, I'm living in Hollywood and I meet him and we become friends. And I was just starting to work in the film business and figure it out, working on lighting crews and things like that. And I said, I have a story I want to tell. And he was looking for a project and he wanted to do something silly. And I said, no, this is what we should do. We should do a story about the consequences of violence and what the impacts are on the ancillary victims around this and how it impacts and trauma and all these things. And best news is I have the idea for the pilot. Here's a scrapbook of all the newspaper articles from the trial. And I gave it to him and he read it and he goes, this is your life? And I was like, yeah, because nobody knew. And he goes, I think I know somebody would be interested in this. And it was two-time Oscar winner Barbara Koppel, who won 2 Academy Awards for documentaries. And so he ended up bringing her on. And so I just crusaded through. And, we made the film and I traveled around the world with it. Then the pandemic hit and then it came out on streaming services. And then sort of the cat was out of the bag, and I'm getting all these messages from like directors I worked with, actors, clients that hired me. They're like, dude, I just saw you in this movie. Like, what the hell is this? Like, I worked with you for 3 years on a show. How did I not know this was your story? I was like, because I didn't talk about it. Because he's like, I remember you said little things and details, but you never I didn't know it was this thing that you were dealing with every day. And I was like, well, yeah, it's a thing. Telling that and sort of taking that narrative, and you see this a lot with true crime, where the media will latch onto a story and they take it and they'll make a television series out of it and a documentary and a book and all this stuff. And everybody sort of gets, and everybody gets swept under the rug who had anything to do with it because they don't get paid. They don't get anything out of this. They don't get to put these projects together. They get taken from them, and they're just like, oh, okay, well, you can do whatever. And the victims aren't honored. The heroes aren't honored in the way that they should, and the survivor stories aren't really told in a way that honors them. I don't think in a lot of ways. Sometimes there are, but and now media is shifting towards doing more of that. They're trying to be more accountable to that. But there's a lot of sensationalization around this. But I wanted to harness this story and do what I wanted with it. And so I started a podcast in 2022 to sort of offer my perspective on true crime and from a survivor's perspective, but also share my story of like trauma and healing and that's what I do. Is the morph was moving past murder, there was moving past trauma. Now it's just the Collier Landry Show, and I talk about things like resilience, and it's always I call my core fan group or fan base Mover Nation, because it's always about moving through something. You move past the trauma, you move past these difficult challenges in life, and you're always looking forward. You're not looking back. There's a reason why the windshield is so big and the rearview mirror is so small. There's a reason for that. You know what I mean? And I try to really hammer that home with the work that I do. And, again, I'm making more of a shift into really discussing these tips and tricks and ways that I overcame this, because I think it's so important. And even when I was going through all of this, I just remember thinking, God, I wish I could see someone that has been through this. I wish I could hear these stories, because I don't know if I was going to be okay. I don't know if I was going to make it through this. I didn't think I would make it till 30, you know what I mean? Which is, talk about the rearview mirror. I didn't think I would have that way of, I guess I believe that I could have that, obviously, because I'm still here, but I never saw an example of that. I never saw that in other people. And it was so important for me as a platform to show people look, you can go through all this and you can lead a really good life. You don't have to be a victim of your circumstances. You don't have to be this person who is defined by this tragedy. You can use this to empower you. You can use this to light up the world. And that, I think, has always been and always will be the driving force in everything that I do moving forward.
I love this, Collier. You've turned a very dark experience, and I can't say that enough, obviously, into something that heals people everywhere, which is amazing. You did say something very early on that struck me as interesting. You said your father's up for parole this year, and you're going to be speaking to the parole board.
Yeah, so my father is up for parole. Again, this will be his third time up for parole this year. He's 82 years old. He just turned 82 years old. If you watch the film A Murder in Mansfield, you see, because basically what I did is I orchestrated everything, and I'm in the film. I'm the central character of the film, which was never the intention, by the way. It just ended up working out that way. But basically, I made this career with the sole purpose of getting an answer from my father as to why he killed my mother. And so in the film, we sit down and I try to get him to confess to the murder, to tell me why he did it. Not even confess, because one of the things that I didn't talk about is that in my process of all of this, I had to learn how to forgive.
That's what I was getting to. I was curious what your position on forgiveness was.
I had to learn how to forgive. And I remember this was a really key thing for me, because I did this when I was a teenager. I'd written my father a letter, which I read to him in the film, by the way, because I hadn't seen it in 25, 30 years at that point. And I'd asked him to just come clean about everything, which of course he didn't do. But I remember in that time of having this realization, and one of the ways in the journeys that started me on this journey of forgiveness is the day my father was convicted, the judge called me down to his chambers, and he talked to me about forgiveness. And he was really trying to implore me and I remember he said, you can't forgive if you can't forget. So it's going to be really hard to forget your mother was murdered. I don't think he meant it quite that way. And God rest his soul, Judge James Henson. He just passed away recently. Amazing man, amazing judge, and just a really compassionate human being. But I remember him talking to me about this and him saying in so many words, you need to get a handle on this now before it handles you. So I remember, of course I had massive anger with my father, but I knew it wasn't helpful for me to be destructive or self-destructive. But that would solve that's not going to bring my mother back. But I did have this dream where my mother came to me and she's like, Collier, you've got to forgive your father. It will only help you to do that. you need to make peace with that because it's not about him, it's about you. And I remember, having that realization that this forgiveness is not about him. It's not about forgiving him and saying, because I think a lot of people get it mistaken because they think that like, oh, okay, if you forgive someone, then you're therefore somehow like relinquishing your power. But really what it is you're taking back the power. You're shifting the power back to you and saying, this no longer has power over me, right? And that's a really key thing, is this no longer has power over me, and I'm releasing it. And that's what I did. And so I remember the first time he was up for parole was 2010, and I went and talked to him, and he had said he was responsible for her death. It was just such a bad excuse. Then in the film, and he makes up a whole story. And then in this latest podcast, I had to reconnect with him because we had to have him on the podcast, which is the one I did with Sony Finding Mom's Killer. And, again, he's sort of in this denial state, right? But yeah, he's up for parole, and I don't know what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do. I'm still very torn about the whole experience because a lot of times I think about like what my life would be like if this tragedy hadn't happened. Where would I be in life? Who would I be? Yeah, I've worked very hard to not let this tragedy define me. And I know, I'm sure people on social media will be like, well, you talk about it all the time, so it has defined you or whatever. That's not why I'm talking about it, and that's most certainly not what I'm trying to convey either. It's about the aftermath of all this. But I think about the impact of his crime, and I think about where my life would have been or where the lives of everyone would be around him, right? And a lot of people don't think about the devastation that's caused by violence, right? And the butterfly effect, the repercussions, the loop that it creates, right? I'm torn because this is my father who took the life of my mother, and is he ready to rejoin society? Is he confessed to me? No. Has he admitted it? No. I don't know what that's worth to society.
A question only you can answer in time.
Yeah.
I have one last question. Is Detective Dave still alive? And if he is he in your life?
Yes, he is. He's still alive. He's alive and well. His back hurts. He's had some back surgery. But no, he is alive and well. And when I go back to Ohio, I will see him, and as I always do, and him and his wonderful wife, Sue. And I go back and see my adopted family or my family and all of that. So, yeah. And, one of the things that's very interesting is when you put yourself out there like this, you make a movie, and you do a podcast, and you're on social media talking about all this stuff. I did an episode of my podcast called TikTok Family Reunion because somebody reached out to me who had known my mother, who was married to my father's cousin on my father's Italian side. And this is one of these really nice moments of all of this is she reached out to me. I had gone viral on TikTok, and we were communicating, and her oldest son lives in New York, and she had happened to be up there at the same time. And I said, I'd love to meet you. And I remember I got out of the Uber, and she was just standing in the street, and her eyes welled up with tears, and she goes, oh my God, you are a spitting image of Noreen. And I've gotten to know that side of the family, which is my Italian side, on my grandmother's side, that my father or none of my relatives know. Like I know, I was just in Philadelphia working a film job, and got to see all of them. I've gotten to know these other people that were like second cousins from me, that were a little distant, that never knew what happened to me, but then had seen the film or seen the podcast and then discovered me, right? And so there was this whole, resurgence of family, and it's been one of those amazing little things that has happened.
It's beautiful. I mean, just like you kind of alluded to, that there's this collateral damage of trauma, right? It doesn't just hurt one person. There are these kind of concentric rings where it goes out and damages others. By the same token, the exposure that this gave you through media platforms allowed you to have a really beautiful relationship with family you would have never had any contact with.
Yeah, exactly.
Collier, this has been powerful. You are an amazing person, and I commend you for sharing. And also because the more people that hear your story and hear how you have utilized resiliency and overcome a lot of this, it's inspirational to help other people perhaps bring that into their lives. And I know that's important to you. Collier, I ask this of every guest who comes on my show, and I'm going to ask you, what is your biggest helping? that one most important piece of information you'd like somebody to walk away with after hearing our conversation today?
That you have the power to construct your own narrative. You are not defined by what happens to you. You have that choice. And that's the power of the human spirit, the power of resilience.
Amazingly said. Collier, give us some links where people can check out your podcast, everything Collier Landry.
Sure. So you can find my podcast on YouTube. You can find me on all social platforms at Collier Landry, Collier Landry. I'm on TikTok. I'm on YouTube. I do the podcast on YouTube as well. You can find me on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, The Collier Landry Show. And we're just getting ready to come out of hiatus to start a new season. And I'm really excited to bring some new stories, including yours, Dr. Richard, and some of my other guests, and to really dive into the tools of resilience and the resilience of this resilient mind, right? And so I'm really excited about that. But yeah, all the platforms, Collier Landry, at Collier Landry, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. And reach out to me on social media. I'm on Instagram, obviously, and all the platforms, TikTok, Twitter. You can find me everywhere. Not really Facebook. You can I have people that help me with Facebook. I always get locked out of my Facebook account, so I don't do much on there.
Well, we will have links to everything Collier Landry in the show notes at drrichardschuster.com. And Collier, what a powerful story. What an amazing person you are. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story with us on The Daily Helping. I know it's going to empower a lot of people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richard. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I want to thank each and every one of you who took time out of your day to listen to this conversation. If you're inspired, go give us a follow and a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice, because that helps other people find the show. But most importantly, go out there today and do something nice for somebody else, even if you don't know who they are, and share it in your socials using the hashtag #MyDailyHelping, because the happiest people are those that help others.